All right, team, welcome to another episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Matt Hamilton, delighted to have your company with me once again. And today we're going to be dealing with the topic of conflict mediation. If you haven't yet, I can guarantee that at some point in your leadership career, you are going to have to mediate a conflict. It's a little bit different to dealing with a conflict directly, i.e. something that you have to deal with between you and another person because you have the issue one-to-one with that person. In this case, you are going to be a third party guiding and coaching. So it is a bit of a skill, and it's one of those ones that you are going to have to learn because it's guaranteed to be something that you have to do as a leader. Guys, I just wanted to say at the top of the show, a big thanks to all of the additional support coming through. I've had some really unprecedented growth, particularly on Apple Podcasts. You know, we're talking 300% growth in followers, downloads, so on and so forth. So a big thank you to everybody who's hitting the follow button, who is subscribing, and who is telling a friend or colleagues that this show is useful to them. I am starting to see the rubber hit the road, and it does look like we are getting some very significant movement. So again, I will just ask you, if you haven't subscribed, please do. It's much appreciated. Tell friends and colleagues about the show if you're getting value. And of course, leave a 5-star review if you can. It really does help the show, and it is much appreciated. But with that said, why don't we get into a real world example from history as to where conflict mediation came in very handy in an elite organization. And then we'll talk about how you and I can perhaps better our conflict mediation skills after this example. Here we go. The gym was quiet in a way that only championship teams understand. Focused but fragile. It was the 1990s and the Chicago Bulls were the best team in basketball. On paper, everything worked. On the court, it usually did too. But beneath the rhythm of wins and titles, there was friction, sharp, persistent, and impossible to ignore. Michael Jordan pushed everybody relentlessly. Every missed shot, every lapse in defense, every sign of hesitation, he saw it, and he called it out. To him, pressure was the path to greatness. Scottie Pippen saw it differently. He was essential to the team's success, defending the best opponents, creating plays, doing the invisible work that made everything else possible. But he wasn't always treated like an equal. The frustration built quietly, then surfaced in flashes, a comment here, a moment of withdrawal there. 2 stars, 1 team, and a tension that could crack everything. And that's where Phil Jackson, the coach, stepped in. Not as a referee, but as something closer to a guide. He didn't call a dramatic meeting to fix things. He didn't demand that Jordan soften or that Pippen toughen up. Instead, he changed the game that they were playing. Jackson introduced a triangle offense, a system that, at first glance, looked like a strategy. But it was also a form of mediation. The offense required trust. It forced the ball to move, demanded that every player read and react together as one. Even Jordan, the most dominant player in the league, had to rely on others under that model. And Pippen wasn't just included, instead he became indispensable. The system did something subtle but powerful. It made cooperation unavoidable. Still, systems alone didn't resolve tension, and Jackson knew that. So, he worked on the space between the players as much as the plays themselves. He let Jordan be intense, and he let Pippen feel what he felt. But he reframed their differences, not as conflict, but as balance. Jordan was the finisher, the one who would take the final shot without hesitation. But Pippen was the connector, the one who would hold everything together when the game was in motion. Different roles, but of equal importance. And behind closed doors, Jackson addressed issues directly. In public, of course, there was only one message, and that was this is one team. No cracks and no divisions. And then there were the quieter moments, the unusual ones. Meditation sessions, conversations about focus, awareness, and presence. Things that seemed out of place in a locker room built on adrenaline. But over time, they gave players something rare, a pause between reaction and response. The tension, of course, didn't disappear completely, but it did change shape. Instead of breaking the team, it sharpened it. Of course, Jordan still pushed, Pippen still felt the weight of his role, but now those forces were pulling in the same direction. And by the time the Bulls were lifting trophies, the conflict hadn't been erased, it had instead been integrated, turned into something functional, even necessary. And that was Jackson's real achievement. He didn't make the team less intense. Instead, he made the intensity work for the team. Now, you guys know I'm a big sports guy. I absolutely love it. I think that if you are into leadership as well, and you take that lens and apply it to sport, even if you're not a sports fan, you will have a renewed appreciation for it. There is absolutely every kind of leadership you can imagine on the sporting field or in the sporting arena. But how do we apply this to the boardroom and to the office? So a couple of points that I wanted to start off with. Sometimes, if behaviour is serious enough, we must step in as managers and run a disciplinary process ourselves without the other affected party. And the reason that's the case is that sometimes bad behaviour that has occurred has caused psychological harm. And so if there is intimidation and issues such as that with the party affected, it can be quite understandable that that party might not be up for a mediation session or a conversation with the perpetrator, so to speak. We sound very legalistic, don't we? Saying things like perpetrator, but you get the gist. However, as leaders, we're always looking to work towards the bigger picture. And that's because we're coaches. Leaders are coaches. We're concerned with guidance. We're concerned with the development and the nurturing of our teams. We always have the bigger picture in mind for the team, but also for the individual. That's why leadership's important. We're there to develop skills to make our team and our organisation as high performance as possible. That's the view we should be taking. But sometimes, when we're actively seeking to nurture and guide an individual, to coach an individual, that process can feel uncomfortable for the individual being coached. And so we need to find this balance where we're helping them to grow, we're pushing them a little bit outside of their comfort zone, but ensuring that at the same time we're there from a guidance and coaching perspective, and we're giving them the opportunity to behave in a self-affirming manner and a developmental manner. And at times, it's going to be difficult for them. But growth often is difficult. It means pushing outside of your comfort zone. So how do we tie this to conflict mediation? Well, presuming that the behaviour that has occurred isn't so serious that the affected party can't bear to be in the same room as the person, and provided there is not a significant risk associated with bringing the two people together, we might want to play a mediation role. And it's really important to frame that with this consideration. And that is as follows. It's better to avoid fighting other people's battles for them. It's better for you, it's better for them, and it's better for everybody else. Why? Why is that? If you're too quick to fight someone else's battle for them, you may be prone to manipulation, or to being manipulated is probably the better way to phrase it. And that's because for the person who is wanting you to fight the battle on their behalf, it removes all responsibility or cost for the conflict. So all of a sudden they're not having to think very hard about what to say or whether they want to make a big issue out of this event, simply because they're not involved. They're not having to absorb any of the costs. They're not having to front up. You'll do that for them. And we know that sometimes narcissists will employ others to fight battles on their behalf so as to mitigate the risk that comes with conflict to their image, because narcissists are really cognizant of their image, all about themselves. And conflict can risk tarnishing that. So they simply use other people to bear that burden for them. So that's the cynical side, right? That's what we need to be cognizant of. Am I being manipulated? Is my willingness to serve, willingness to help, a weakness? Am I being manipulated? But a secondary consideration, and I think this is far more common, is that sometimes it can also be the case that a person is just not comfortable confronting somebody else, even if it's over something minor. And perhaps that stems from them struggling historically to stand up for themselves. Maybe they don't have a lot of self-confidence or self-esteem. Maybe they have a bit of anxiety, a bit of a higher anxiety baseline than others. And this is precisely where you and I step in to assist. You might have heard a phrase from your HR department, and that is resolution at the lowest possible level. And what that means is that instead of everything having to go through a HR process, everything having to be documented and official when it comes to conflict resolution and management in the workplace, it's far better to avoid all that and have people sit down and talk to each other. Far, far better. So that's what we mean by resolve at the lowest possible level. And as leaders, you and I are charged with nurturing that outcome as best we can. And so what we want to do, in closing, is to empower the one-on-one conversation by playing a mediating or guiding role. Now, it might be the case that you have decided there's a risk of tension and anxiety coming to the fore during this process. People are likely to be very awkward and nervous at the prospect of doing this. And so as a leader, a part of that coaching and guiding and nurturing is you've got to read the room. And as a coach and a guide, you are responsible for creating the most productive environment to have this conversation occur. And so a few ideas for you to take forward to your next conflict mediation session. Firstly, I want you to set expectations with the person who wants to initiate the conversation with the other party. They need to be clear that it's their responsibility to bring their concerns to the table. And they also need to be cognizant that the way they phrase it is very, very important. It shouldn't be in a confrontational, aggressive fashion. It should be with a view to solve an issue in a mutually agreeable fashion. So you need to have confidence as a manager that when you bring the two parties together, the issues are going to be raised in a respectful, constructive fashion, and the other person's going to be given the opportunity to also speak about things from their perspective. You also need to be prepared to explain why this mediation approach is best, i.e., it is better for you in the long run to have this conversation with this person off your own bat so as to build respect and rapport with this other party. That's how I would phrase it, and it's true. The relationship is instilled with a lot more respect if this person doesn't get the impression that you've run off behind their back to tell on them. Okay, you're actually showing up face to face and having a difficult conversation in a polite and constructive manner. So we have to frame it like that. But then come the nuances. Even if you do all that, it may still be the case that when you're under the fluoro lights in a boardroom or a meeting room, people get a bit intense. There's a little bit of anxiety, right? It can be quite an uncomfortable feeling. So what I want you to do is create optimal conditions. Maybe that's a scenario where you say, actually, let's get it out of the meeting room, out of the boardroom, and let's go for a walk around the campus or around the business district, wherever you work. You know, maybe we get off site to a cafe or something like that, sit outside with a coffee, and we're going to have this conversation, the three of us, with me as a guide, in a more relaxed, natural environment. Plenty of fresh air, bit of sunlight, automatically remove the tension associated with the workplace. And then you need to simply facilitate the conversation. Now the person, because you've structured the expectations, because you've communicated what they need to do, they will come prepared as per your guidance, and they will lay it all out on the table in a clear, respectful fashion, and the other party will have the choice, will have the opportunity to feed back from their perspective, and a conversation flows as a result. And a couple of things I've found. Firstly, people are usually a lot more conciliatory and amicable when they're having to have a conversation with someone face to face. Those automatic social cues kick in and people are automatically a bit more polite with each other when they're face to face. And all you need to do at that point is keep tabs on it and guide it. You know, maybe gently push both parties to agree on what good looks like going forward. What behaviour do you expect of each other from a mutual perspective? And then once you've guided that conversation and we're closing it out, we reaffirm those expectations that these people have of each other, the expectations that you have of them going forward as their leader. And then after the fact, you follow up. You make sure that the behaviour occurring from both people is respectful in the weeks that follow to gauge whether the mediation has been successful. And you reassure and clarify in an ongoing fashion where needed. And what I mean by that is if the interaction concludes and you follow up with both of them, as a leader, you check in, you reassure, you let people know it's all okay, you let people know that it's a healthy thing to engage in, that nobody is going to experience any further consequences as a result of that action, because it's just two humans coming together and having a healthy confrontation, emphasis on healthy. And then you clarify your part in that role. I'm here to guide and to help you to work forwards to a healthy outcome. And I'm going to close on the point that confrontation doesn't need to be aggressive. I've said this before. You can be confrontational just by sitting down and actually being willing to raise an issue with someone. It doesn't require aggression. It doesn't require animosity. All it requires is the courage to sit down and say, hey, this isn't working for me. This is why. And this is what I would like to see going forward. Easier said than done. But we as leaders, if we can foster that culture where people are much more inclined to respectfully raise something with a colleague and establish where their boundaries are, that is so much more healthy than a culture that sustains backstabbing, backbiting, rumours, malicious rumours. Very, very unhealthy. So bear in mind what the bigger picture looks like if you can establish an environment where people can have healthy conflict like that. And I want you to think a little bit about your role as a leader in facilitating that. Think of yourself as a coach, a guide, and a mentor. And I think you'll find that your workplace as a whole benefits immensely from that approach. Guys, we'll leave it there. Thank you once again for joining me. As I said at the top of the show, fantastic growth, lots of new subscribers, and that's really encouraging. Fantastic. I'm so glad that you're all getting benefit from the show. Head to www.exceptionalleadershippodcast.com. Make sure you sign up for the fortnightly newsletter. It's called The Brief. And of course, check out the additional content that I've got, all for free and all for you on that website in the form of blogs. Until next time, I'll see you later.